John Miller, a middle-aged man with weathered hands and a heart of gold, gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck as it rumbled down the quiet streets of Maple Creek. A small, picturesque town surrounded by rolling hills. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the road, much like the doubts creeping into his mind. But John wasn't the kind of man to let doubts win, especially not when 3 young lives were depending on him. On the passenger seat lay a manila envelope, slightly crinkled from the weight of the decision it held, the official adoption papers for 3 brothers. Ethan, Caleb, and Marcus. Just 2 months earlier, a devastating car accident had claimed the lives of the boys' parents. John had been the contractor renovating their home at the time and had grown close to the family. Particularly the boys, who often watched him work with curious, wide-eyed wonder. John's heart ached as he remembered the funeral. 3 young brothers, clinging to each other in a sea of grief. Ethan, the eldest at just 10, trying to put on a brave face for his younger siblings. Caleb, 8, normally full of energy, stood silently, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. And Marcus, the youngest at 7, sobbed quietly into Ethan's sleeve. They had no other family willing to take them in, and John couldn't bear the thought of them being separated. What would Melinda think? John whispered to himself, thinking of his late wife. Melinda had always wanted children, but life hadn't blessed them with any. Now, at 52, John was about to become a father, not to 1, but to 3 boys who desperately needed him. As John passed by Mrs. Thompson's house, he noticed her peering out from behind her lace curtains. He knew what people in town were saying. He'd heard the whispers at the hardware store, seen the raised eyebrows at church. A single white man adopting 3 black boys was far from ordinary in their small, conservative town. But John didn't care about what was ordinary, he cared about doing what was right. The pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of John's modest 2-story house. The white paint was chipped in places, and the front porch could use a fresh coat of stain. But the house was sturdy and warm, much like its owner. In the back seat, the 3 brothers sat huddled together, clutching their small backpacks as if they were life rafts. "Well, boys," John said gently as he turned off the engine, "we're home." The word home hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan glanced at Caleb and Marcus before cautiously stepping out of the truck. "It's big," Caleb said quietly, his eyes scanning the house. John led him up the path to the front door, noticing how they clung to each other. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood polish and freshly baked bread, a smell John had intentionally created, hoping it would feel inviting. The boys stepped in hesitantly, their sneakers making barely a sound on the hardwood floors. "Would you like to see your rooms?" John asked, his voice soft. The boys looked up at him, their expressions a mix of hope and disbelief. "Our rooms," Ethan repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. John nodded and led him upstairs. Each room had been freshly painted in soft, neutral colors and furnished with simple yet comfortable beds, dressers, and desks. "These are all yours," John said, watching as Marcus ran a small hand along the edge of his bed. While Ethan examined a wooden desk with obvious interest, Caleb lingered in the doorway of his room, looking uncertain. John knelt down to their level, his knees creaking slightly. "Listen, boys," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I know this is all new and maybe a little scary, but I want you to understand something important. This isn't temporary. This is your home now, and I'm going to be here for you. Always." Marcus's lower lip quivered. "Promise?" he asked, his voice trembling. John placed a hand over his heart. "I promise. We're a family now, and families stick together." Ethan's lips curled into a small, tentative smile, and even Caleb's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. Marcus, in a sudden burst of courage, flung his arms around John's neck. John hugged him tightly, opening his arms wider as Ethan and Caleb joined in, forming their first family embrace. News of John's decision spread quickly through Maple Creek. By the time he took the boys to the local grocery store that weekend, whispers followed him down every aisle. Elderly women clutched their purses tighter, and parents pulled their children closer. At the checkout counter, Mrs. Aldridge, the self-appointed moral authority of the town, turned to her friend with a pointed look. "Did you hear about John Miller?" she said, her voice deliberately loud, taking in those boys without consulting anyone in town. "It's completely reckless." John pretended not to hear, but he noticed how Caleb's shoulders stiffened at her words. He guided the boys toward the dairy section. keeping his head high, though his heart ached for them. The next day at church, Mrs. Aldridge continued her crusade. Children need a mother's touch, she declared, stirring her iced tea. And those boys, they'll need special attention. John Miller is in over his head. The whispers grew louder, and soon, they weren't just whispers. Parents instructed their children not to play with Ethan, Caleb, and Marcus. Neighbors who had once greeted John warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. Through it all, John stayed focused on his boys. At the dinner table, he made sure to ask them about their day, sharing funny stories to lighten their spirits. When Marcus asked why people stared at them, John knelt down and looked him in the eye. Sometimes people are scared of things they don't understand, he said gently, but that's their problem, not ours. We're a family, and we're stronger together, determined to show the town the strength of their family. John encouraged the boys to get involved in the community. They joined sports teams, volunteered at the library, and helped John with carpentry projects around the house. Slowly, some hearts began to soften. At the library, Marcus's careful organization of books impressed Mrs. Willow, the librarian, who said, "He has such a good eye for detail." At the park, Ethan taught a group of younger children how to shoot hoops, earning shy smiles from their parents. Caleb's natural charm shone through at community events, where his laughter became infectious. But progress was slow, and prejudice lingered. One morning, John woke to find hateful graffiti scrawled across his garage door. He painted over it before the boys could see. But the pain of the act lingered in his heart. Even so, John refused to give up. "We'll keep showing them who we are," he told the boys. "One day, they'll see." Over time, the family's unwavering kindness and resilience began to change the town. When a devastating storm hit Maple Creek, John and the boys were among the first to help their neighbors rebuild. Ethan repaired fences, Caleb delivered supplies, and Marcus comforted frightened children. Mrs. Aldridge, the town's harshest critic, watched from her porch as Marcus gently rescued her ceramic garden gnomes from the rubble. Tears filled her eyes. "I was wrong about you," she said to John one afternoon, her voice trembling. "Your boys, they're a blessing." From that moment on, the walls between the Millers and the town began to crumble. Families who once kept their distance now invited him over for dinner. The whispers turned into warm greetings. And at the town's annual festival, the Millers were asked to lead the parade, symbolizing unity and hope. 10 years later, Maple Creek was a different place. And so were John's boys. Ethan had become a skilled carpenter, Caleb a compassionate teacher, and Marcus a nurse dedicated to helping others. Together, they had not only built a life but also transformed a community. As John watched his son stand proudly at the town square, surrounded by friends and neighbors, he felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced prejudice with courage, met hatred with love, and turned whispers of doubt into cheers of admiration. Their journey had shown Maple Creek, and the world, that love truly knows no boundaries.